Hi everyone, I'm in London. Absolutely beautiful autumn, as we say here, day. Some dudes just driving a Ferrari past. That's absolutely a feature of London. Ferraris, absolutely, Lamborghinis, unbelievable. You see them everywhere, and you see them just parked in the street as well. I mean, it's really quite common to see them down in Mayfair, which is just over here. So this is Hyde Park, and we're gonna head in and talk about oil. So yeah, I'm back in London. The Ferrari's gonna cause problems. That's a sweet Ferrari, actually. This is all a congestion zone, so you need to pay to enter this part of London, and it's also an ultra low emission area, which is wider, where I don't know exactly what the rules are, but essentially there's significant controls on driving into and out of central London, and kind of bugs us because this is a Roman road. This is Bayswater Road, which is actually Roman, and we don't like it when the Roman roads get blocked up by governments. That's the Swan. That's been there like since time immemorial. I'm pretty certain it was a tavern when the Romans had the road. There goes the Ferrari again. Anyway, oil is super interesting at the moment. Obviously, there's a lot of media interest. Actually, I've done a horrible job of saying yes to interviews because I've been running around here in London, coming over from New York and doing personal stuff. But the bottom line is a lot of action with oil. When CNBC and everyone start calling me, that there's stuff afoot. And obviously the big concern is that with Iran launching supersonic missiles, that Israel's going to do something, and the one option is to bomb the Iranian oil infrastructure, which Israel has comprehensively proved it could do, because they've been, and I think it's very deliberate, they've been sending long-range bombers into Yemen, which is further than Iran. So would they do it? All sort of circles back to a US political question, which is, one option obviously is that the Democrats are saying don't do it 35 days before the election, please, because if they seriously spike oil prices, it's obviously not good for the incumbent. There's conspiracy theories that maybe the Israelis want Donald Trump to win, and so they would actually deliberately spike oil prices into the election. The list goes on of potential outcomes. The reality is actually there's still enough oil, and a big touchstone for us when we think about all this stuff is the Iranian proxy Houthi attack on Abqaiq in 2019, when you had the single most dramatic interruption to global oil supply that you could possibly imagine, which was a 7 million barrel a day outage of Saudi's single biggest processing facility at Abqaiq. And what was so remarkable about that, because it was an absolutely stunning outage, we've never seen anything like that in terms of overnight oil outages. The fact was that the Saudis managed the situation absolutely brilliantly, and legend has it only missed one cargo. They probably would say they missed zero, and the oil market kept functioning. And if you look at the price action around that attack, you had a really brief spike, but actually it all happened in September 2019. By year end, the oil price was back to where it was before the attack, which was about $70 a barrel. So we sort of know that the reality of the physical threat that, for example, Israel poses to Iranian Karg Island, which would represent overall from Iran about 1.2 million barrels a day of exports. We know that the physical threat and outage is not a problem, because essentially Saudi has the spare capacity. But then of course you start thinking, well, what if Saudi wants Donald Trump to win? Then it gets, these are the complexities, and maybe all of this is just conspiracy theory, right? Maybe they're not really all talking. But of course yesterday what happened is Biden came out, and I have to kind of, I shouldn't laugh, and sorry, I just nearly ran over by a jogger. Biden came out, and I'm sure you saw it, but basically was asked, would you strike the oil facilities in Iran? And he said, we're discussing it, which was incredible, but then said, but that's a bit anyway, and then moved on. So the global oil market spiked, dramatically, because it was obviously, if the Democrats, this is the point, if the Democrats are talking about, yeah, maybe we'll do it, you know, maybe it's inevitable. We'll see. I think the other complexity here that I've been thinking about is the Rosh Hashanah. And, you know, maybe when we come out of Rosh Hashanah, which I think is today, it's a 2-day festival, maybe that changes the Israeli, you know, calculus here. But we'll see. I mean, I wouldn't be short. Nobody's going to be short oil into this weekend, right? Let's settle on that. You know, nothing really changes on the physical balances, as I say, and everyone's aware that there's too much oil for 2025. There's a lot of OPEC chatter at the same time, Saudi getting frustrated with the cheaters. The theory is Saudi has a strong call on Iraq because essentially they've signed a lot of aid deals with them. You know, they do have a Sunni versus Shia overlap with Saudi, Iraq being mixed, Shia Sunni, and of course Saudi being Sunni. They have given considerable aid and, you know, development to Iraq, support to Iraq, and in return they expect them to respect their OPEC quotas. And, you know, there could be significant financial consequences for Iraq if they don't, which for the Saudis, probably no doubt what the Saudis are telling them. Now, having said that, because Iraq is like 400,000 barrels a day over what it should be producing according to OPEC. So, and that's without the Kurdish barrels, by the way. So there's another 400,000 barrels a day in Kurdistan. I mean, there is oil everywhere on the supply side here. It really is an issue. So, yeah, in amongst all that, the idea that the Saudis would have a view on this is obviously one that's pretty obvious, because strongly the Saudis want less Iranian exports. So, you know, these are some of the things that you have to think about. And all the time, of course, you've got the fact that the Houthis are there effectively blocking the Suez Canal. So, yeah, there's a lot of geopolitical situations in oil. But our issue is you just can't get past the physical availability of it. You've also, of course, got to remember that the US is absolutely no longer dependent on Middle Eastern oil. And a very good example is ExxonMobil. I visited their Baytown refinery late last year, and that used to run 100% Saudi crude. It now runs 100% Exxon equity Permian crude. And that's obviously just an enormous shift in the margin. Off the top of my head, I'll say Baytown's 300,000 barrels a day. So you've got right there a huge facility that used to be dependent on Saudi that simply no longer is. And that's obviously the case across the US, because at peak we were importing 13 million barrels a day when oil hit 150 in 2008. That makes the geopolitical risk of oil absolutely enormous, because you're heavily dependent on imports from the Middle East, Suez Canal, everything else that we're watching. So the anchoring of the oil market observer is in that risk. You know, that's why people get so frantic about what's going on in the Middle East. But they're simply forgetting that the reality of the matter is that the US is now exporting 2 or 3 million barrels, exporting 2 or 3 million barrels a day. So at the margin, you've gone from 13 million barrels a day of net imports in 2008 when the market was panicking. Peak oil, there's not enough supply, China's going to use all the oil, everything else. And now you're in a situation where essentially the US is exporting, and therefore the risk from the Middle East is very minor. And that's also been a contributing factor to the demise of Venezuela, because historically you couldn't have let Venezuela collapse. It was supplying all the Gulf refineries with very significant amounts of oil, millions of barrels a day. And ultimately with the Permian, you didn't need to worry about, you know, Chavez and his successors, because we just didn't need to. And I got that actually directly from the State Department. So Venezuela's, you know, Permian collapsing Venezuela is another thing that's pretty obvious but not often talked about. The other thing that people aren't really picking up on that we've been talking about is oil positively correlating to the dollar. So because of that shift at the margin in US net imports, the oil price now, we believe, is positive for the US economy net because of the power of what's going on in Texas, the strength of the Texas economy, which is 10% of the US economy behind only California. Very strong population growth as well in Texas, so it's not all about oil, but the reality is the oil, we talk about a multiplier effect. So this is primary economic activity, where somewhere between 2 to 7 times every unit of GDP generated by the oil industry is multiplied through the economy, because these guys need trucks, they need hotels, they take planes all the time. The oil industry is, you know, capital intensive, but also highly economically active, obviously. And that's why Texas benefits, obviously, from high oil prices, and that's why we believe the US economy benefits far more from high oil prices than it has historically. And so what we're talking about here is that as the oil price falls, as the dollar falls, they're positively correlated. Historically, because of the US status as a massive net importer, it was the opposite. And you can see the flip occurred very directly, and I can show you the chart. I'll publish it on Twitter with this link. You can see very clearly that post-Russian invasion of Kuwait, Russian invasion, that was Iran, that was Iraq. Post-Russian invasion of Ukraine, the dollar flipped its historic inverse correlation to oil and went positive correlation to oil, and it's been a very clear overlay ever since. So what does that mean? Well, it's a chicken and egg situation, because of course the dollar is not entirely by any means dependent on oil. It's in fact dependent on relative interest rates. But if the oil price starts falling, we think it would actually lead to something of an additional economic slowdown in the US and a weaker dollar as a result. Okay, so that's some thoughts on the current situation. We remain obviously very bearish into 2025 because these are kilos. The old joke was the Swiss drugs police said to me, it's all right, we're looking for kilos. And with oil, you're just looking at very big chunks of oil and adding them up. And, we're talking really in 500,000 barrel a day increments. And so at the moment, the demand side forecast for 2025 is drifting down from 1.5 million barrels a day of growth towards 1 million. And most people have easily more than 1 million of non-OPEC growth next year, leaving zero room for OPEC. And effectively nothing has changed in terms of what's going on in the Middle East. The worst possible impact, given the Suez Canal is effectively shut, would be taking out Karg Island and disrupting shipping. But you can believe that, there's going to be many military forces ensuring that the Straits of Hormuz remain open. So essentially, combined with a very big, significant net short position in oil, which caused a major short squeeze, this is all pretty transient in our view. And we don't think there'll be a sustained upside in oil prices, which you can pretty much see in the oil equities. Okay, I don't know, I've been going on for hours, haven't I? So this is Hyde Park. This is a really beautiful fountain area. Up here is the statue of Peter Pan, and there's another really cool thing up here, which I'm not going to bother, it's going to take too long, but there's a whole load of like parakeets that now live there, which is, I've got to say, kind of a sign of global warming in a very odd way. It's said that the parakeets, some people say that a breeding pair were released by Jimi Hendrix on Carnaby Street. That's my favorite story, which is obviously complete nonsense. Other people say that there was a hurricane here that destroyed Hyde Park actually in 1987. Absolutely bizarre. I was here at the time it happened, and it was, we just don't get hurricanes in Hyde Park, and we did. In that storm, an aviary out in Sussex, I think it was damaged, and the parakeets escaped, and now they live in Hyde Park. That's the other theory. And then another one, which is possibly true, is during a filming of, I forget the name of the film, a Humphrey Bogart film, they brought in some parakeets. It's the one in Africa. Was it with Katharine Hepburn? They brought in parakeets for that film, and they escaped from, one of the famous Pinewood film studios or somewhere. And now they live in Hyde Park. Maybe next week what I'll do is I'll come and find the parakeets for you. All right, have a great day.